time has come, the walrus said, to talk of many things. And while I don't particularly feel myself the walrus, lobster, or the carpenter, it is time to take a look at the AD&D Dungeon Master's Guide. You're looking at as the reprint cover. I have my original DMG somewhere. My seat is shrinking beneath my feet, but I don't have it here. But actually, my old read-along graphic that I homemade for myself had me with, which I used for this video, has me holding up the DMG. So you get it there. Hey, the K5K. Hey, Terrence. And here's some, this is just black tea with a little bit of milk for the working man. I'm not going to read the whole thing. I'm not insane. And not that it's necessarily insane, but it's a lot. It is a lot, as we shall see. So I'm going to be picking and choosing, but I'm happy to take requests if there's things that folks in here feel like are sort of must-read sections. I'm going to try to cover a bunch. I put this as part one because I don't imagine to get through even a condensed list of things to go to in a single stream. I'm not going to be here all night. So we'll hit a bunch of different, I think, highlights, as it were. I mean, there's a ton in here. I mean, that is the thing with the DMG. I always recommend anybody who's interested in kind of the old school D&D to pick up the first edition AD&D Dungeon Master's Guide. I mean, it's the height of Gygaxian prose, for good or for bad. Some people really love it, and you love to comb through it for bits of wisdom. Some people dislike it. There's no question there's a ton in here. I think there's also no question that it's probably been as much of a bane for AD&D in retrospect as it maybe has been a boon, simply because when you look at this, it is so dense and there's so much things in here that I think it gives a slight bit of a false impression. I've had this discussion before. I've talked about, I don't remember ever playing with all these modules in place. People have said to me online, oh yeah, I did. We play with everything, or we did, or we do. And, I'm not going to tell someone they're a liar, but I find it hard to believe. And when I went to places like ShireCon that were full of grognards who had been playing AD&D since it came out, and I went through and just asked some of them casually as just a little bit of a, hey man, I'm just trying to get some numbers. Did you ever play with all the rules? And I got, laughing, a little bit of ha ha ha, and like, are you kidding me? But you can't tell any of that experience of people, especially people from my generation. I was born in the 70s. I wasn't someone who was able to play really for the first 10 years or so. The hobby was more or less, or maybe 8 years is when I kind of first started getting involved. And for a lot of us of that generation, we were playing a lot of a mishmash of games. Maybe we got the Holmes version if we were a little bit older. Maybe we got some of these AD&D books mixed in with basic books. Of course, when you see something that's called basic and then you see something, it's called advanced. I think this was experience a lot of us had where, we got to do the advanced game because we're advanced. I'm 10 years old. I'm ready for an advanced game. Got in here and just play these big mishmashes of games, some, basic or Holmes, some AD&D. The stuff is so close to each other that you could really go back and forth. And given that I'm playing in grade school, and it's so the kind of discussions you get on with the internet in terms of the sort of analysis of mechanics and play just didn't exist. The oddities that people like to go and so, isn't it interesting that this chart, the numbers don't go up smoothly, or it didn't matter to us. And if we were even using the charts or using something else. Sloan Scott asks, is the version with the probability charts? It is, which we'll see in a second. I do want to look at some of the stuff up at the front because I think this gives a good idea of where the game is at the stage. And, we get some of that Gygaxian kind of prose. And then I'm going to kind of pick through. Like I said, if you are interested in stuff and you're having to be here in the chat, obviously, if you're watching this later, choices have already been made. But if you're here right now and there's something, I always wanted to read this, or would it be interesting to do this, or I really love this bit, I'll definitely read his notes on time down there, since that has had sort of a comeback lately. Stuff on Henchmen and Hirelings would be pretty good, but I'm gonna pass over some things. I'll probably read some of the things that I just think are kind of fun, things like the segments and stuff like that, which I think are I just find them interesting and fun, even if I don't would never use them outside of having a VTT that could automate a lot of this stuff. Another thing says we play all the rules in second ed, but it's okay. You can call me a liar. I mean, second edition is a lot slimmed down and streamlined, I think, in terms of the rule set than AD&D. So I don't doubt that when I'm pretty sure we played second edition. We pretty much played it by the book. I don't recall us omitting anything. First edition, this book, I feel like I mean, my understanding of it, and I don't know exactly how close to reality is, but I don't think it's too far off. Is there were a few things going on. They were trying to split up with Arneson, which failed, but that was part of the AD&D. The Advanced was trying to do stuff differently enough to get Arneson out as an author. Didn't end up working, but they were trying it. I think the other thing, my idea here, and I've read Playing at the World, but it was ages ago, so I'm not super up on it. You have a few things in play. You go from sort of, garage, sort of put together books of the 3 brown books, and then you get folks later trying to kind of slimline it for newer players and homes, and then a little bit, I'm not sure when the timing is, maybe a little bit after this, you have BX, the original kind of BX box, but you're getting in, I think they're getting a lot more into organized play, and you have these stories in Dragon and probably elsewhere where Gygax is fielding phone calls at his house in the middle of dinner, but there's a DM who's calling me from Madison, Wisconsin, wanting to know about this or that. And a lot of these stories we end up with Gygax going, well, hey, did it work for you? And then the GM going, yeah. And then Gygax going, great, do that. Or like he says in the beginning of the white box, hey, you want to play something wacky? Just work with your GM to make it happen. Great. By the time we get to AD&D, things have shifted. It's much more corporate. We're a lot more emphasis, I think, on kind of con games and organized games and getting everybody playing with the same rule set, because it's all great when you're playing in your own isolated groups to have all these different rules all over the place. But I could see that from an organized play standpoint, you want to be able to go into a gaming shop in Wichita, Iowa. You want to be able to then you go from there. You go on a road trip. You end up in Boston, Massachusetts, and you step into a game. You want to be fairly similar. So I get that where he's coming from. So you go from someone saying, hey, do what works, and this all this to yours, to advice that's more along the lines of, please don't do that stuff. Play what we're giving you, which on the line is kind of a bummer, but I get it, right? We're now into more. We're now into sort of D&D as sort of a corporate thing as opposed to that kind of punk rock in the garage kind of thing. But we'll get into it. No, Sorian says, I recently picked up this book again. The only thing I'm really looking into is the individual XP award rules, especially awards by class. Oh yeah, there's some kind of fun little things in there also. And we have a whole bunch of appendices. See, I'm not going to read the preface and stuff. Here's the probability chart, which I think is handy. 3d6 is a bell curve. 2d6 is some kind of pseudo bell curve, from what I understand, but 3d6 is an actual bell curve. And I think it's nice that you get this, because you can see if you're rolling a d20, your highest chances are hitting in that, was it, basically 10 to 13 kind of range. Or was that the probability? Yeah, well, yeah, what, 10 or 9? Say 9 to 13, I guess. Am I reading that correctly now? All right, well, I'm going to need my glasses. Maybe I'll zoom in a little bit here. Let's see, I don't want to read all of this. And the other thing, too, with this book is you're looking at, this is a lot of text. So part of the reason why I'm going to be doing some kind of skimming and handpicking is because there's a lot of text. I mean, just a couple of pages in the player's handbook that I read a couple of weeks ago, which I thought was really interesting on sort of adventuring advice. It ended up taking me 2 or 3 streams to read, just because even though it's only 2 or 3 pages, each page is super dense. So we have dice, we get the dice. Get some things about the curves, which is kind of cool. I really wish more games would do that, especially if they're using complex dice mechanics. One of the things I think that happens, and I struggle with this myself because I kind of have these concepts that I've been working on right now, which are sort of dice pool oriented. And it would be nice to be able to show to somebody, hey, when you're doing these pools and dice, here's kind of where your odds are. Because I think it's good to know, just as a general thing about, hey, I roll this dice, what are my chances of succeeding? And I think when you have, say, an X and 6 type die, that one's fairly easy. Of D4 is obviously easy, D10 super easy, D20 a little bit, it's still in the thing. And of course, D100 is very easy. you can see, oh, I have a 10% chance to kind of know how that shakes out. When you start getting in all kinds of complicated stuff, and then maybe you add exploding dice on top of it, and this and that and the other, like even advantage and disadvantage, though it's kind of simple, it's a little bit complicated. The odds, it's not at one point I thought it was always like +5, but it's actually not. The bonus you're getting actually depends on either the target or your bonus or something. Like, it actually fluctuates how good advantage or how bad disadvantage is for you. This is, so the cover of this one, I don't know which version. So no Soren's asking about this was the revised. This is, I don't know if this is revised or not. It's got the newer cover on it. I don't know how much content's actually been revised from it, but that's the version we're using. It's the one that's on drive-through. Soren Scott says they think Free League had a probability chart. Oh, that's cool. It's a good thing to have. I feel like, especially when you have complicated systems, it's good to at least give people an idea. I think really both players and DMs of like, here's what, at least a rough idea of what you're doing, so that you can kind of grok it easier, because it just gets out of hand. And like I said, I'm doing work as kind of dice pool sort of system, and I'm finding that for myself, just trying to figure out. It's difficult, and if it's difficult for me to figure out if I'm getting sort of my odds on track, then how can I really, hard to explain to somebody else. So we get some, there's all kinds of details in here. So we get some sort of, you can get some material periodicals in Lake Geneva. Great. Creating player characters. I'm going to sort of skip over that, but we have multiple methods of generation. I always love this stuff, like the effects of wish on character ability scores, because I guess that's going to come up a lot. I know, ish. Characteristics for player characters. You can use, height and weight tables. You can use those things. We get some. They're very keen on doing lots of. You'll see the line, differentiating the different species with the different genders and things like that. Stuff that I don't know if I really cared about it back then. Every once in a while, you hear some story of somebody going like, no, girls aren't as strong as boys, therefore they have to use a different chart or something silly. But we're playing a fantasy game. I don't know that I would really bother with that stuff at this point. But back in the day, folks were big on that. Big on all those different things, all that specificity, whether it was really useful or not. So player character non-professional skills. Let's see this one. When a player character selects a class, this profession is assumed to be that which the character has been following previously, virtually to the exclusion of all other activities. Thus, the particular individual is at first level of ability. However, some minor knowledge of certain mundane skills might belong to the player character. Information and training from early years or incidentally picked up while the individual was in apprenticeship, learning his or her primary professional skills of, clericism, fighting, etc. If your particular campaign is aimed at a level of play where secondary skills can be taken into account, then use the table below to assign them to player characters or even henchmen if you so desire. Assign the skill randomly or select according to the background of your campaign. To determine if a second skill is known, roll on the table, and if the dice indicate a result of 2 skills, then assign a second appropriate one. So we just get a bunch of secondary skills. So this is a little bit, right? I think one of the things, if you're playing from BX or depending, or your BX child, BX clone, BX or similar OSR game that doesn't have skills, I think that's one of those things you run into is, well, what about how do you measure that stuff? And you do, some people do X and 6, some people will do roll under attribute just for kind of your general stuff, but you can give them these secondary skills. We've got a whole list here. Jason says that the gendered specificity is why players won't play Harn Master, have to use other systems with Harn World. Yeah, I find that I think I like what Pendragon did, which is basically say, listen, we know if you're trying to pick some kind of super historical accuracy for an Arthurian campaign, okay, that's whatever, but you might say, well, there shouldn't be really any female knights or this or that, but they were like, it doesn't matter. Like this is we're playing a fantasy game and a fantasy sort of thing. So you know what? We're just going to say whatever it is, it doesn't matter. And I appreciate that approach more than holding some line and saying, no, who are you help? I don't really understand. Who are we helping here? What is that kind of rule supposed to be really doing for us, or that kind of division? Like, it's not, is it making, I don't know, if I'm a dude, am I made to feel better by that? Probably not. If I'm a lady, it probably makes me feel kind of bad for no real reason. It's just kind of silly. I am breaking out the old school stuff, Marky. Indeed. Okay, so when secondary skills are used, it's up to DM to create and or adjudicate situations in which these skills are used or useful to the player character. As a general rule, having a skill will give the character the ability to determine the general worth and soundness of an item, the ability to find food, make small repairs, or actually construct crude items. For example, an individual with the armor skill could tell the quality of normal armor. Whoops. What did I do? I accidentally hit a button. Let's see. For example, an individual with armor skill could tell the quality of normal armor, repair, chain links, or perhaps fashion certain weapons. To determine the extent of knowledge in question, simply assume the role of one of these skills, one that you know a little something about, and determine what could be done with this knowledge. Use this as a scale to weigh the relative ability of characters with secondary skills. So it's a really interesting approach. It's probably not what people really want to hear. So like this is good, right? So the idea is, okay, your player goes, yeah, I'm an armorer, so I'd like to start making myself a suit of full plate armor, sir. And so you as the GM can go, okay, well, this is a secondary skill. You've maybe dabbled a little bit. Now maybe I could look at a secondary skill that I in my life might possess. So let's say, okay, I know a little bit about, I don't know, wood making, right? I can do a little bit of wood thing. I could make something simple. And now I say, well, now someone's asking me, can I make their house for them? How likely and everything is that going to be? And maybe time involved, et cetera, et cetera. And so I say, well, and I can sort of use that as a guide to say, well, about you and your armor skill to plate mail is the same as me with my little bit of wood making, or I don't know, whatever. Was it even wood making? Is that even the name of it? Woodworking skill is to making a house, a wooden house, a cabin. Probably not very much, right? So that's how it goes. Now, that's great conceptually. In the middle of a game, might not be the best. It would have been nice to have some kind of role or some kind of mechanic to go along there. That's kind of how I would, if this came out today and that's what I read, I'd say, wow, that's kind of cool, but I get it. But man, would have loved here's a 1 in 6 or a 10% chance or something of that once, but we don't get that. But it is, what I do think is the useful part here, and the interesting part is this, which I think you run into a lot when you're playing these kind of games, especially these old school kind of D&D games that relying on cleverness, relying on a lot. It's relying very much on finding sort of real world analogs and applying them. Like you think, okay, what are these people going to do? Like, well, what would these people do in real life? Okay, could this person do these things? Well, what could we do in real life? Trying to find out, like, what would be the kind of thing in our world that would be similar? What are the odds of that being able to do that, right? More or less. And then applying that in the game. And that's how you come up with your rulings. I mean, it probably would be nice if they said something like that, just like, hey, use your own. I think they probably do in some places. You're basically applying the stuff from our world to that, as opposed to maybe what you would do in, say, 5th edition. Find the mechanic, find a particular. I mean, it's kind of like in some ways it's the same process, but we don't have a set mechanic for it. This is not, okay, well, woodworking is such and such a skill, which is an intelligence skill. Now go to intelligence. Now I find the DC and so on and so forth, right? In some ways, there's probably some ways that this is good or bad. Like in the one that's in the modern version, someone's got a 20 intelligence, means they're going to be really good at woodworking, assuming woodworking is an intelligent skill. Maybe say wisdom, but same thing would apply. You could basically take something that should be very difficult and it's not so difficult because they have a high score, whereas with this one, we don't have any scores. We kind of have to build it, but you're probably not going to be able to argue GM. But I've got an 18 wisdom as to why you should be able to make plate mail when you just have a background, just in your background. You spent a month as an armorer's apprentice. No, you probably know how to use plate mail, regardless of whether you have an 18 wisdom or not. Jason says, Harn World with the mini 6 rule system is a trip, though. The mix of super realism with cinematic rules makes for crazy GM rulings. I bet. Is the Harn Kickstarter still going? Because I kind of want to buy the books, but they're expensive. I just kind of want them. Harn is amazing. It's on my kind of bucket list of things to play, but I feel like it's super niche. I would love to know what the numbers of people playing Harn is. I wonder if I would be shocked by either the small amount of people or if it's a bigger number than I think. But the whole concept I love. No, sorry, it says inspire many of us to go out and try pseudoscientific feats to solve game rule disputes about what people could or couldn't do. I hope so. One can only hope. So we get some stuff here about, okay, starting level experience, that's fine. Character aging, disease, and death. So here we get all this kind of specificity. I like that it's not just their sort of species, but also their class, because it sort of adds to that whole concept of things take more time. Just like your experience tables are going to make it much faster for a thief to level up than a magic user. So that means that when you are showing up as an elf magic user, you're going to have spent at least 150 years in, I don't know, as a level 0 progressing to level 1 magic user. You don't need as much experience working your way up as a thief. And that's kind of cool. Now we probably wouldn't even think about such things. We would just either roll randomly or let somebody choose their age. I mean, you can still let them choose their age. And then we have some aging stuff, which is fine. We get some things on unnatural aging. The diseases stuff is kind of cool because it's things that we don't necessarily think about too often. I mean, we think about the kind of stuff that comes up with a spell or an effect, but not maybe just, hey, you've contracted a disease not because someone cast some spell on you, but just because you're chugging around the jungle and it's not your native habitat. Jason says that they bit the bullet having hardbacks. Yeah, I know the hardbacks are. I do want it, Jason. I don't know if I'm going to be able to swing it, but I do want it. I'm envious. Oh, interesting. Jason says they have 767 backers currently for the Kickstarter, and they estimate that there are twice the number of users playing Harn World than using Harn Master. Okay, interesting. Terrence says, love how they picked the most readable typeface and then shrunk it to unreadability. I can, let me zoom in a bit more. Yeah, I'll do that. Let me see, can I do it? Make it a little bit better. Might make maneuvering around the pages a little bit trickier. Whoops, hold on. Let's see something a little bit. Let me just fix. I'll change the view page display to 2-page scrolling. Now view to full screen mode. And I think this might work a little bit better. All right, disease. As with poisons, this system does not attempt a specific treatment of a subject which is beyond its scope and purpose. What is done, however, is give general categories of disease and maladies and their game effects, as well as the chance to contract an ailment according to the surroundings. Naturally, you will often have no need for any random determination of a disease, as the affliction will be specified. But even then, you will find that the random determinants of occurrence and severity might be helpful. So then we have some subsections, contraction of disease. Each game month, you may wish to check each character to determine whether or not he or she has contracted a disease or disorder. Check each week if conditions are particularly favorable. These are kind of cool things. I kind of dig this stuff because it puts more emphasis. Those tensions are if you are in environments that you are not native to, which a lot of them are not, and you're in, here we have, okay, what might be favorable disease, very hot weather or hot, moist weather, or filthy, crowded conditions in warm weather. And you can look at those and then you can start, rolling some dice and seeing what happens. And it definitely adds, I do feel like it adds an element to the world. Now, you may find that the juice, a phrase that I love, the juice is not worth the squeeze, which I can get. But a lot of times what I do is I'll end up reading stuff in the DMG. I'm like, oh man, I want to implement it. And then I don't, I get lazy or I forget. But whoops. What did I do? Did I go the wrong way? I did. But I do find this stuff very cool. Yep, different elves. Oh, yeah, I didn't even mention that. Different dwarves have different rates. Different elves have different rates. I mean, it's neat. And this is kind of what the DMG is all about, right? The DMG, especially this one, is all about an extreme density of sometimes very specific, sometimes very interesting information. Does this stuff, like these kind of numbers are kind of fun, but most times are they meaningful at all? Does anyone really? They probably won't come up at all, but it's kind of cool. It's kind of cool that they're there. Jason says that Grant Iglesias gave an interview in support of the Kickstarter and gave that estimate based on their sales numbers. Haha. Well, it's good to know that Harn's out there kicking. It is on my list, and I'd hate to finally be in a position to play it. There's no one to play with. I got to try to. I got to figure out when that Kickstarter ends, see if I can afford the books. Would be cool. Contraction of parasitic infestation. Oh, wait a minute. Let me read this other paragraph first. Check each and every time the character is exposed to a character in a way which would allow the disease to be communicated. Note that disease carriers can be human, animal, insect, food, drink, vermin, dirt, filth, etc. As DM, you must indicate any special disease circumstances applicable. Also, fun fact, this would be very fun. I've always heard about people, stories, people want to run sieges and things like that, or when people are trapped, and hey, throw some diseases in there. One, if you have characters that have some kind of disease curing ability, it really makes them feel useful. You got that a paladin or somebody who has some kind of cure disease. This is a really cool way to give them something that they can really do. For other characters, it might add some initial tensions. It's a great way of showing the effects of famine or weird weather or anything like that. It's kind of cool. I mean, rolling once a month or once a week might feel like it's a bit much, but it's one of those things. Maybe if you put a note and saying, hey, if the party's in town or whatever, or city, if it's filthy or they're in some kind of hot, and again, maybe especially in areas that they're not used to, like they're in jungles for the first time or they're in some other situation for the first time, rolling and maybe somebody catches it does add some, I think it adds some interesting, tensions to things. 4 days are in the Kickstarter. All right, Jason, I got a little bit of time left. Contraction of parasitic infestation. Each game month, check for each character to determine if he or she has become infested with some form of parasite. Check each week if conditions are particularly favorable. So this is very similar to the disease we just read above. Now, the favorable conditions for parasites are filthy conditions in warm weather, which also matches disease, and also hot, moist weather. It's basically the same, except apparently parasites don't like very hot weather, just hot, moist weather. And then the same kind of same text, and then checks are made by using the appropriate tables shown hereafter. So here's another thing you're going to find with the DMG: lots of complex tables. This probably also hasn't aged particularly well in terms of our thought process. We generally speaking, when you see newer editions of the game and like Oversight, I think there's been a lot of attempts to kind of condense, simplify, streamline these tables. The DMG is like, no, man, you're going to be adding a whole bunch of small things, and you're going to be carrying percentages and this and that and the other. It can be very cool because, again, all those percentages allow you to be highly specific. You get a lot of granularity in there, but then you also have a lot of added steps and added things which make it a bit more of a pain. If you remember, oh yeah, I wanted to check for disease, and now it's like, well, okay, instead of just saying, oh, it's a 1 in 6 chance, or roll against their constitution or something kind of simple, instead it's like, no, base chance 2%, and then you do all this math, then you got to figure it out, right? As opposed to, you could probably have made that a lot simpler, but it is what it is. I mean, there's nothing particularly wrong with it, and this is kind of one of those things that I feel like these are the kind of games that should be coming out now, because I would hope that this comes out now and it just comes right away with a VTT integration. And so you can have all these things just running behind the scenes. And then as the GM and players, you don't have to worry about all this stuff, but you get all the cool results of having all this kind of detail and stuff behind the scenes. Nevertheless, so you have a slightly less base chance of contracting a disease than a parasitic infection, and then you modify, and then we've got a disease or disorder table where you can see the area of the body that's affected. Is it an acute, or is it chronic? And then the severity, is it mild, severe, or terminal? And then we even get some descriptions about what's happening here. I mean, this is cool stuff. I'm down with this stuff. Maybe what I would do, here's probably what I would do with this. And I wonder if some of the stuff, I feel like you could come through and grab all this stuff. I mean, not just, copy paste, but like do something like, instead of coming with all these, when somebody gets a disease or disorder, roll a bunch of this stuff up and turn it into, here's the disorder. You can give it a name, disease, whatever. And then you can put it out there in the world and then roll some dice to see if they catch that specific disease. And so you're not rolling all this stuff in the moment. You're like, okay, I'm going to create a disease. I'm going to call it Thripshaw's disease. And then I'm going to roll some dice. Okay, it's chronic. It affects the urinary system. And then you can have maybe you can even have some more dice. Even make it like a save. Okay, save versus death. If you miss by 2, it's mild. If you miss by less than 8, it's severe. And if you miss by more than 8, it's terminal. Something like that, right? Easy, a little bit easier, but you still get a lot of the good stuff. Death due to age, determinant of maximum age, all good stuff. More stuff on maximum age. Explanation of abilities. Do we need to read any of these? Are any of these interesting? I don't know that they are. I mean, they're here. They're going to make the point. Charisma is not just physical attractiveness, which is good. Let's see. We've got our elves, our rangers, followers for upper level player characters. Your players know that upon reaching certain levels and doing certain things, such as building a stronghold, they will be entitled to attract a body of followers. These followers might be fanatically loyal servants of the same deity or deities, in the case of clerics, stalwart admirers of fighters, or whatever. Your players will eventually turn to you for information on who or what they gain. And when the time actually comes and they have reached the level and done the right things, you will be able to quickly inform each and every one concerned of what fate has decreed by the way of followers. So this is basically, and I like the systems that extend this to an earlier time. So followers are not hirelings, right? They are people that come to you for, as you saw in those reasons, it's not for money. It's because you represent prestige. And to put it in kind of modern sense, your character becomes somebody like a Steve Jobs like figure, or a famous insert a athlete or somebody else who then other players want to be near, right? If you're an engineer, you probably thought, oh, Apple under Steve Jobs, like he's someone I want to learn under. I want to go be there. So you go. You don't go because they're paying you X dollars a month. So it puts them on different footing than hirelings who are really there for the money. I like to think about bringing the followers on a little bit earlier in the game. I just think you can have kind of a nice progression, but I also get the whole thing, like with the fighters, like, okay, you can see how having a stronghold is then, it's like you're then putting the call out for people. And then of course, ooh, that's a big kind of deal. You could probably have something similar where you go like, what's a big deal thing you could do to put your name out there, to be your renown? Clearly founding a stronghold somewhere and becoming a lord of types is that kind of event. But maybe there are other ones. Maybe you could have them pick up one guy at level 4 and maybe a couple more dribble in at level 6 or 8. And then when they hit whichever level that they plunk down, or whenever they put down a stronghold, then that kind of opens the doors. I mean, you got to be a little bit careful, because some of these, you can see here, for some of these troops and followers and things, they get to be kind of high levels. You obviously don't want a leader to show up at 6th level when you're 3rd level, right? So you gotta roll some things out. But I kind of like, I think in the to encourage these things, it can be a little bit, it can feel like a prize that's out of reach, the stronghold stuff. I think especially with like modern players who maybe might not feel like you kind of got the grind in you to make it up 10 levels. So I feel like when you can add that stuff in earlier, it might encourage folks to think about strongholds when they might not, if they're going, oh my gosh, I got to get to level 8 or 10 to do that. Like, I'm never going to get there, kind of thing, right? All right. I'm not going to read through all these, but we get, clerics, you're rolling for cavalry, fighters, leaders, and troops, ranges, all good. And then we got, you can just seeing all these different types, animals, mounts, different creatures, special creatures, thieves, assassins. Upon attaining guild master or guild mistress status, roll 7d4 to determine the number of lower level assassins in the local guild. You may adjust this result according to the population of the area if you deem it necessary. After determining this number, find the race and level below, and then find which will stay. 75% will desert the guild, as noted in the player's handbook. All new assassins coming to fill the ranks will be 1st level, but race must be determined on the race of assassin table. So you get all your assassins. How lovely. Yes, Jason says hirelings are the pre-stronghold. That's true. But I like the idea of having a follower. And there is, I feel like there's a lot of fictional support for having at least one sort of, at least one kind of sidekick type that's more than just a hireling. You could probably just play with hireling rules, but I think, Robin the Batman, or I don't know and you might say, well, that would be another PC in this case, or say Robin Hood and some of their merry men, and I sort of like the idea if you can kind of accumulate them over time. So maybe just start off as just Robin Hood and what was his name? Will Scarlet. And then like they do in the movies, right? Oh, okay, it's just Robin Hood and Will Scarlet. All right, and they're running around the woods. Okay, well then they encounter John Little John. Oh, okay. Then he becomes part of the crew, and then they encounter Friar Tuck, and then Friar Tuck sort of joins the crew, and then you have kind of all the other sort of unnamed merry men are kind of your more hireling types, But it's not like there's a wrong way to do it. Jason says they trickle in once you have a stronghold. Yeah, I mean, yeah, I definitely wouldn't play it like you just open the doors and there's 8 guys standing there. But I just mean it's giving it to them over the course of their life rather than at the end of life. And then I think then you can really have them be more. You have a chance for their personalities, I think, and stuff to come out more. Maybe what's his name? Aragorn. I mean, in the books, it doesn't. In the movies, they got rid of him, but in the books, he had some of his fellow Dunedain that were traveling with him. That sort of thing. This is before he really had a stronghold, sort of idea, but they were kind of traveling with him, and they were his compatriots until he had the Fellowship. There's some overlap with the Fellowship and the Dunedain, and they kind of go their separate ways. But like I said, it's just maybe I would maybe do that a little differently. But that's just for my game. There's no wrong answers here. No wrong here. We're on page 18, Ink Pen. Though already halfway through the hour, so I haven't gotten particularly far. I'm not reading everything. I'm just kind of I'm looking for good things. Maybe I'll zoom out a little bit so I can just see more. Actually, these should be good. Actually, never mind. I'm not going to zoom out here because looking at the thief skills, I mean, I don't even know what they said about them. I can't remember. So let's read it here because it's always one of those places that seems to be rife with readings and alternative readings and what did they really mean. So let's see what Gygax has to say. Thief abilities. The following additional explanations of thief abilities will help you to prevent abuse of these activities by thieves and other characters able to use these abilities in whole or in part in your campaign. Roll of the dice for any thief function must be kept absolutely secret so the thief or similar character does not know the results. So that's kind of a big thing, right? Is you don't let the thief, and I don't know why that fell out of fashion because it makes total sense to me. Like the thief doesn't know whether they've hidden well or not. And I know some folks say, well, the thief would know if he's da-da-da or da-da. It's like, well, if you're going to make it take the most obvious sort of thing, maybe they would, but then they're also have been trying to hide in that spot. So maybe they wouldn't know. But it's interesting. This is, whoops, and I went the wrong way. It's interesting that this is coming. No, sorry. It's interesting that this is coming from the standpoint of trying to stop abuse. I'm not sure what abuse is because some of these things are kind of tricky to get. So I don't know why they're so worried about abuse, but maybe this comes up. I'm sure some of these things were written up specifically because they got the letters in the mail about what was going on or saw stuff at Gen Con and were alarmed by what they saw, I guess. All right, so backstabbing. Opponents aware of the thief will be able to negate the attack form. Certain creatures, Otyug, slimes, mold, etc., either negate surprise or have no definable back, thus negating this ability. So basically, if they can sense you coming, you don't get it, and if they don't have, you could probably even make that more general. Here they don't have a back to stab because it's a backstab. But I mean, you could just say they don't have there's no critical part of their anatomy. So there's no critical area you could hit them. Jorga asks, how long ago did this start? About 40 minutes ago now, Jorga. Yeah, and I'm only on page 1920. I am not going to get very far, even picking through. I'm not going to get very far. So I will have multiple of these, probably more of these next week, because Fridays I usually dedicate to doing kind of community stuff, looking at Reddit to see what's kind of going on in the community. So expect more of these after tonight next week. Jason says, I just set the expectation that my players will separate player knowledge from character knowledge. It has gotten easier to enforce an expectation as we all age. Yes, I mean, some folks are very good at that. Some folks are not so good at it. I think it has a lot to do with experience and how they're coming to the game. I mean, yeah, you ultimately do what works best for your table. And if you have a table in which that separation works great, I've been places where it does for the most part, but then you see that one person that's trying to angle in, and I probably have been that person at one time. I mean, I know there's certainly been times where I'm like, okay, I know this as a player, so now I need to try to figure out how I can get into a situation so my character will know it. And I don't think that's an invalid way to do it. Like, I know there's an invisible guy there as a player, so what can I do? how can I figure out? So that's kind of was a puzzle for me. I know there's something there. Now I got to figure out to get my character in a position doing things that don't seem nonsensical to try to figure out what I already know, which I think is okay. And to me, it's a problem when I attack that square over there. It's like, why are you doing that? It's like, no, I need to figure out how I can bridge the gap between my character knowledge and player knowledge. Picking pockets. Failure allows additional attempts. The victim might notice and allow the thief to operate anyway in order to track him or her back to the place he or she uses as a headquarters. Up to 2 attempts at picking a pocket can be made during a round. All right, well, that's interesting. I don't know that I would allow additional attempts, but I guess they're more generous than I. Jason says, I'm super. Discussions of this book are always educational. Come to think of it, they should set up a book group to read this with their GM friends. You totally should, Jason. I think it'll be a really fun exercise, especially if you have folks that have, come to the game from different places. It'll be interesting how people read, what they take from it, how they read it, how they hear it in their heads. No, Soren says, abuse low probability abilities, and DMs used to have you essentially fumble if you failed your roll. Yeah, it's an interesting. I mean, yeah, these like backstab. It's kind of hard to abuse because it's sort of hard to get in a real position to backstab. It ain't the 5e thief where it's like I use an action to hide and then I can just backstab at will. It's like, man, it's hard. Like, in most situations, it's really hard to get up behind somebody. And I mean, in like a dungeon kind of situation. If you're in town, you're walking about, I suppose you could backstab strangers to your heart's content. But in a dungeon situation, usually guards are facing you. They're usually up against walls and other things. So trying to figure out how to get behind somebody to be able to backstab them, that is no easy thing. When I was playing a thief, a couple times I was literally a backstab in. I was super, patting myself on the back for just able to get the attempt off, even if I didn't actually get it. Yoga says you don't even have to hide, right? You just have to be able to have advantage. It's something to do, right? So somebody else gives you advantage. I don't remember what the thing is. Yeah, you're right. You don't actually have to hide. Opening. Okay, so we did opening locks. No, we did pickpockets. So opening locks, the act of picking a lock to be opened can take from 1 to 10 rounds, depending on the complexity of the lock. As a rule, most locks will take 1 to 4 rounds of time to pick. So if you're wondering how long it takes, you can roll some dice and find out. Finding and removing traps. Use the time requirements for opening locks. All right, same kind of thing. Moving silently. Silent movement is the same as normal exploratory movement, i.e. 12 feet per round as the thief creeps up. Croodles. I don't know what even that means. Croodles upon the area or victim or whatever. Do not inform the thief that his or her dice score indicated a lack of success at this attempted stealth. If that is the case, he or she thinks the movement is silent, and the monster or other victim will inform the character of his or her misapprehension soon enough. All right, I like that. I think the thing is here, though, it's not all bad news. You're not moving. Whoops, I keep doing that. You're not moving particularly slow. You're moving at the same rate as you are, but you're not meant to know whether you succeed or not. Now, for hide and shadows, as is plainly stated in the player's handbook, this is never possible under direct or even indirect observation. If the thief insists on trying, allow the attempt and throw dice, but don't bother to read them, as the fool is as obvious as a coal pile in a ballroom. Oh, that's funny. Sometimes there's some Gygaxian gems in here for sure. Likewise, if a hidden thief attempts movement while under observation, the proverbial jig is up for him or her. Naturally, a creature closely pressed in melee is not likely to bother with looking for some thief not directly in line of sight, but a vision would normally extend to the thief's area of activity, then observation rules apply. Unobserved attempts to hide in shadows must likewise stand the hazard of the dice roll. A score greater than the required number shows that the character's ability is not on par with his or her intent, although he or she thinks hiding has been successful. The creature looking in that direction will note a suspicious outline form or whatever. Note also that a thief hiding in shadows is still subject to detection, just as if he or she was invisible. So some kind of interesting stuff here, right? You if you're under direct or even indirect observation, you can't hide. Now you may think you can, but we know the GMs we know better. And the part about melee is interesting too, because that's another big thing that people get into. Well, they're in melee, so they don't notice. And it's basically, well, they might not notice if you're outside their line of sight, but if you make kind of a sight cone and you would be in that sight cone, you're still observed. But if you're over somewhere else, then you're not observed. So that gives you can try to think of some interesting, can I get over in an area to get out of that line of sight and then sneak around? So you have something you can do, but it's not It's not a gimme because they're in melee. Having a creature being in melee doesn't like, oh, turn on the hide in shadows kind of stuff. Hearing noises is pretty straightforward. The thief, just as any other character, must take off a helmet or other obstructing headgear in order to press his or her ear to the door surface in order to hear beyond. So I think the interesting thing here is hearing noises specifically for listening at doors. There's no other way about it, right? This seems to be, I never really took it at that, but maybe I just never read it close enough. But this ability seems to be literally for do you hear anything if you press your ear to a door? Which is kind of interesting in its own right, I suppose. Orga says, if you had a friend with 5 feet of the target, you can sneak attack in 5 feet. Okay. I believe it. Dav says, never gave more than one attempt to pick pockets. Well, you see, Dav, Gygax would say you're wrong, though they might say that the person might be letting them try a couple times just to track them back to their dastardly lair. Climbing walls is probably the most abused thief function, although hiding in shadows vies for the distinction. The ability to climb walls is something which is acquired through training and practice, just as are most of the other functions of the thief. The rate at which vertical or horizontal movement is possible depends upon the texture and other conditions of the surface. So, depending on how you describe the surface, gives you basically your fleet climbing, and depending on the conditions. So something that's very smooth and very slippery, 0. You might be able to get a grip on it, but you're not going to be doing much climbing, and then so on and so forth. And then also we have a note here: slightly slippery surfaces, double chances of slipping and falling. Slippery surfaces make chances of slipping and falling 10 times more likely. Thus, a slippery surface cannot be attempted successfully by any thief under 6th level, and even a 10th level thief has a 10% chance per round of slipping and falling. I'd love to hear the stories of what the abuses are, because it's interesting, because I feel like things swung the other way with it being really hard for thieves to get their skills to use, but clearly this is being written as a response to, I guess, a whole bunch of thieves getting away with a whole bunch of hot nonsense that at least Gygax felt like was more than they deserved. Most dungeon walls will fall into the fairly rough to rough category. Some will be non-slippery, but most will be slightly slippery due to dampness and slime growth. Yummy slime growth. Read languages. I'm not too interested in that one. Thieves and assassins setting traps. We do have some poisons. Oops, I'm not going to read the poisons. Does anyone care about poisons? I'm not that big on the poisons. Just get there. All these different types, and depending on onset times and so on and so forth. I mean, I think that there's probably the same kind of problems were happening in the games now that were happening then, which was people feeling that certain abilities were circumnavigating their puzzles. And probably back in the day, at least until the magic users started getting some of the more fun spells, that was going to be thieves. Climbing the walls, probably arguing that they should be able to climb on the ceiling and just doing all the stuff. And the GM's going like, I don't see anything that's talking about that. And none of these modules are telling me whether the walls are slippery or not. Or, heck, there's the original rules, like I think in the player's handbook and whatever, probably don't even have all this specificity. So it's just like, oh my gosh, what am I doing? This guy's just climbing and doing all the stuff, and I handled, I had these traps and things, and they're not, what do I do? And so you end up going like, well, they must all be like slippery smooth, like glass covered in slime, and that's the same thing, right? Where people go, oh, the Aarakocra can fly, so I can't do this puzzle, or woe is me. And so you start thinking about coming up with all kinds of reasons why the Aarakocra suddenly can't fly in your dungeons. I think it's kind of similar. It just goes to show that people have been tackling the same kinds of issues then as now, with similar thought processes of basically what can we do to nerf, to sort of silently nerf this thing. Here we go. The monster is player character. On occasion, one player or another will evidence a strong desire to operate as a monster, conceiving a playable character as a strong demon, a devil, a dragon, or one of the most powerful sort of undead creatures. This is done principally because the player sees the desired monster character as superior to his or her peers and likely to provide a dominant role for him or her in the campaign. A moment of reflection will bring them to the unalterable conclusion that the game is heavily weighted towards mankind. So this is a big change from the white box, which was basically, hey, look, whatever you want to play, do it and work with your GM to make it happen. And Gygax in his own game, I think, had Balrog player characters. I wish that there was some. I know, as far as I know, there's no extant sort of class chart for what a Balrog was, but people played stuff like that. But now we get to AD&D, and whether you believe this kind of surface explanation or whatnot, that the stance has changed from, hey, that's great, go with it, to, if you're doing that, you're probably trying to basically play hero ball in the game, and I'm just telling you it's a bad idea, and we're gonna try to stick closer to here. Jason says that Gygax learned to say no sometime in the early 80s. I wouldn't doubt it. I mean, I think it's a complex situation, and I think again, going to organized play, I think, is a big deal. Like, I wanted to say, oh, commercialism and whatever, but I think that's part of it, because even organized play, I think part of it comes down to, this is what we're doing as a company, and so whatever. But again, organized play, you want things to be, that idea of balance plays a much heavier role if you, on this idea that you're playing in conventions, you're playing in gaming stores, you're playing set modules, which is now a thing that wasn't a thing at all. White box come out, there's no modules. The concept of a module didn't really occur until slightly after the white box comes out. So I think the idea is you're playing in like sandboxes with mega dungeons, and you're kind of playing in your own group, and that's kind of what you're doing. So, hey, go to town. But now we're in sort of a different mode. Okay, now we are putting out modules. It's been invented and going out, and now we're putting out modules, and all this stuff's happening, and we want to do this. So, like, we want to funnel you towards the things that we can be confident in the balancing of, versus who the heck knows if you show up at a gaming store with some handwritten character sheet saying, oh yeah, and by the way, I'm a Balrog and whatever. It's those kind of things that, and I remember reading about them in the magazines and stuff, and stories in the schoolyard and things about, like, I killed a god and I've got 8 Vorpal, my character's got 8 Vorpal swords, and that kind of weird power creep you get was happening with players. So, I could certainly understand, but it does kind of bum me out, because part of that whole, like, hey, like, you can do whatever, be whatever. It's, he's tamping it down. It says, look, kid, you're a level 1 Balrog. You can have shadow or flame, but not both. Yes. And that's why I would have loved to see, like, what did a level 1 Balrog look like? Now, of course, fast forward to 3.5 when we're back in the monsters player character business. But that's really complicated. All right, so let's read a little bit more of this, and then maybe this will be the last section tonight. See how far I can get. All right. Advanced D&D is unquestionably, quote, humanocentric, unquote, which is probably something else that doesn't strike a lot of folks in modern OSR and new OSR, right? Because a lot of folks find humans boring. I never have. I still like to play humanocentric campaigns. I like to run humanocentric campaigns, but I get it. You have all these things. Certainly from a modern kind of 5e perspective, I think a lot of folks find humans boring, and hearing that, oh, this game is proudly and outwardly skewing towards human, would probably cause some eye rolling, I presume. Nosorian says, do you think newer editions are less Gygax because humanity lost prominence? I think there's a lot of reasons. I think that not all the Gygax stuff is positive, and I think it has to do with the way the game changed. And look, Gygax's views, there's a lot of evolution and changing. Like, some of his post D&D stuff they tried to do got super complicated, and then he came back kind of towards the end to a much more simple down, sort of back to OD&D thing. Like, some of his stuff I have some of it. I forget even the names of the systems. I just got them because I was just interested in them, but they get really kind of, crazy. I think there are a lot of evolutions in his thought, depending on when you happen to catch him. But definitely, I think that, at least at this stage, and I think people have said that he just wasn't a fan of demi-humans. He didn't like magic users. He didn't like demi-humans. I think he was it stems from his background in kind of sword and sorcery stuff, where the heroes are all humans. Conan, Fafhrd and the Grey Mouser, these are all human characters that face inhuman things. It's much less than, people love to point out kind of Lord of the Rings influence, but I really feel like D&D scores a lot more Conan and those kind of sword and sorcery stuff than Lord of the Rings, in terms of a lot of the way the game plays. And even Lord of the Rings, to say, is very human centric. There are some dwarves, but you just kind of get one. They're some elves, but you just kind of get one. Okay, you got halflings. You got more halflings, but they even in the books, I think halflings in Lord of the Rings are kind of seen as kind of an offshoot of human anyway. And then everything else is pretty much human except for the villains. Jason asks, am I still on Mastodon? Absolutely. I think I've been quiet for the last week or so. I just haven't really posted anything, but I am still on Mastodon. I'm not going to be leaving. All right, so let me read a little bit further, and then we'll see. So, okay. Advanced D&D is unquestionably humanocentric with demi-humans, semi-humans, and humanoids in various orbits around the sun of humanity. Men are the worst monsters, particularly high-level characters such as clerics, fighters, and magic users, whether singly, in small groups, or in large companies. The ultra-powerful beings of other planes are more fearsome. The 3 Ds of demigods, demons, and devils are enough to strike fear into most characters, let alone when the very gods themselves are brought into consideration. Yet there's a point where the well-equipped, high-level party of adventurers can challenge a demon prince, an archdevil, or a demigod. While there might well be some near or part humans with the group so doing, it is certain that the leaders will be human. In cooperation, men bring ruin upon monsterdom, for they have no upper limits as to level or acquired power from spells or items. So the idea here is because humans are the only ones that can have no level caps, that presumably the highest level characters in the game will tend to be human. I don't know if that's actually true in terms of how games shake out. I know there was always a piece of wisdom, and I don't know where it comes from, but that was basically if you rolled well on your stats, play human. If you rolled kind of crud on your stats, pick a demi-human. The reason being is that you get the demi-human benefits up front, and if you have someone with low stats, you're front-loaded. You may not make it to level 4, but who cares? You've gotten some good and useful stuff in your first level. You start off with like an elf. You start off with certain things, right? You just get up front. Whereas as a human, you're in it for the long haul because you don't have that level cap. So if you rolled really well on your stats, grab a human and hope that you can get up to the levels because you're going to have the best stats for it. If you feel like this guy could die at any second, someone could breathe on him, someone could make one of those disease rolls and he's going to be dead, you might also play a demi-human and get the perks in the front part of your gameplay. Let's see. Stu says, I'd love to have a full audiobook of the 1E DMG. Whew. That would be... Maybe someday someone on Audible will do it, or we'll get good enough AI voices that we could play let some computer who's not gonna get dry mouth or get tongue tied read through it. No, Soren says humans in AD&D because of the unlimited advancement and access to classes. Parenthetically, remember a few peers playing paladins and having serious doubts about how they got such high ability scores. I think that's true for every group that had paladins in them. So, how did you get those? How did you get those rolls? Yorga says, my understanding was that Gygax was less interested in Lord of the Rings than he was in various other books. That is my understanding as well. I don't have any particular insight into that, but yeah, and I think you can kind of tell from the way the game is constructed because Lord of the Rings is not sword and sorcery, but I do feel like D&D has a very sword and sorcery vibe. Now they did crib a lot of stuff, of course, hobbits becoming halflings and balrogs and ents becoming trents and all these things got in the game because he cribbed stuff from everything. But I think if you want to look at really what that most important influence is, I mean, Rangers and everything, but I think it was sword and sorcery stories. The game features humankind for a reason. It is the most logical basis in an illogical game. From a design aspect, it provides the sound groundwork. From a standpoint of creating the campaign milieu, it provides the most readily usable assumptions. From a participation approach, it is the only method for all players are, after all said and done, human. And it allows them the role with which they are most desirous and capable of identifying with. From all views, then, it is enough fantasy to assume a sword and sorcery cosmos with impossible professions and make-believe magic. To adventure amongst the weird is fantasy enough without becoming that too. Consider also that each and every dungeon master worthy of that title is continually at work expanding his or her campaign milieu. The game is not merely a meaningless dungeon and an urban base around which is plopped the dreaded wilderness. Each of you must design a world, piece by piece, as if a jigsaw puzzle were being handcrafted, and each new section must fit perfectly the pattern of the other places. Faced with such a task, all of us need all of the aid and assistance we can get. Without such help, the sheer magnitude of the task would force most of us to throw up our hands in despair. I think basically the idea here is he's saying is that we can relate most to humans. We're the most comfortable playing humans. We understand them. There's enough weirdness in the game so that we kind of play basically our own ciphers for the world. If you think in a movie like in the Lord of the Rings movies, or even in the books, where the hobbits are kind of stand-in for us as readers, because as much as they are these magical creatures, they're very much like humans as we understand them, that they can kind of be our eyes and ears in the world. And I think here our characters are our eyes and ears in the world, so why not make them similar as possible? I think a lot of people would probably take umbrage with a lot of this now, and I think that people have shown that they can have interesting takes. What I always liked about the human stuff is it allows you to really make everything super weird. And I don't always love Gonzo games, but I like when like the fairies or the elves and the dwarves, that they could just be really, really just weird, and they can have a lot of fun with that. And it's hard to do when you also have player characters who are them, because a lot of times for myself, like I'm playing something or I'm running something, I don't necessarily have my full vision I'm able to write out. I just I'm going on a vibe. It's hard for me to then pass that on to a player and then hope that their vision and mine are kind of the same. Now, of course, I could share ownership and I could say, hey, player, do your own thing. And that's fine too. But I think sometimes that, sticking with humans, it lets us to really get weird, which is kind of what he's saying. But at the same time, I also get that people like to play things that aren't human. And that's kind of part of the fantasy as well. And as we've moved away from classic sword and sorcery into other tales, though a lot of them still feature kind of humans. I mean, Harry Potter isn't about Dobby, the house elf. It's about a bunch of humans, and sprinkled around them are creatures. But it's undeniable that people like to get in that kind of fantasy, the Star Wars and Star Trek to a lesser extent, where you've brought in these other kinds of creatures. And it's like, it would be, I don't know if anyone would feel, they probably wouldn't feel authoritative enough or want to draw a line in the sand and say, "No, our game is mostly about humans and you're going to like it." But this was 1979, and Gygax clearly feels empowered to sort of be, if not saying for sure, because obviously there are non-human classes in the game, there are non-human characters in the game, but giving a pretty good, sternly worded, "Hey pal, you're going to be human or close to human, and you're going to like it." Jason says that Wordmill's Creature Crafter is great for Monster Variety. I haven't heard from that. And Yorga pointing out that he cribbed monsters from Japanese toys. Yes, he did. I mean, that's I love that stuff. Jason objects to Mega Dungeons are awesome to run. Yeah, it is interesting, right? Because the game started being about Mega Dungeons, and here he's saying it's not just about having that down here. I wonder if that's a shot. I mean, well, he had Castle Greyhawk too. I don't know. I mean, not that I think, having read about Blackmoor, that it was just a castle and dreaded wilderness, but it kind of interesting taking a shot at sort of the earlier. All right, I guess at this point, if we're going to call this maybe generation 2 of the game, kind of taking a shot at least the somewhat assumption of version 1 of the game, which was some kind of urban settlement, some kind of mega dungeon and dreaded wilderness. Interesting that. All right, so let's see. I'm conscious of being at the hour. I don't want this to go too long. Let's see if there's anything in here that I feel like is worth reading. He's going on in a lot more detail. I mean, he's really trying to impress us with this, right? By having a basis to work from and a well-developed body of work to draw upon, at least part of this task is handled for us. When history, folklore, fable, myth, I used fable twice. Nope. When history, folklore, myth, fable, and fiction can be incorporated or used as reference for the campaign, the magnitude of the effort required is reduced by several degrees. All right, so he's kind of passing on into helping us with sort of finding references for our game worlds. And now feels like he's established why humanocentric basis is the basis, or why it is the best of all possible bases. So now, having established, so he's clear, he's determined that he's done enough to establish the why. You will certainly see the impossibility of any lasting success for a monster player character. The environment for adventuring will be built around humans and demi-humans for the most part. Similarly, the majority of participants in the game will be human. So unless the player desires a character which will lurk alone somewhere and be hunted by adventurers, there are only a few options open to him or her. So here is the kind of, and this I've seen come up a lot, and I'm probably sure I've used this in the past. Well, hey, you want to play something weird, I mean, really out there, then you have to deal with the fictional consequences of playing something really out there. If you're going to play, I want to play a an intelligent slime monster that's 20 feet long, 10 feet high, and makes burbling noises and, smells like a skunk. Well, guess what, pal? What happens when you go to town? And there's a certain point to that, because you want to make the world seem realistic. So you don't want, assuming we're not playing sort of the Star Wars version where you open the cantina doors and every species in the galaxy is hanging out there in some way. That makes sense. But at the same time, I think it can also be overplayed. I mean, this is really that part where you'd say nowadays it would be somewhere in here would be that have a session 0 and talk to your game master or talk to your player if they have something really weird, and let them know if this weird thing is going to cause issues in the setting because X, Y, or Z. You're playing a giant, but you're playing in a human world. So how's the giant going to cope with that kind of thing? Or, you're playing a human in a giant world. How's your human going to cope with that kind of thing? I think now would be a lot more folks. It would tend to be a lot more supportive of this. But I remember having those conversations of, well, you're playing a Minotaur, and I hate to tell it, but most people seeing a Minotaur are not particularly enthused by your presence. So you guys got to figure out how to make that work. Jason pointing out that Tome of Adventure Design is also great for monster variety. Yeah, Tome of Adventure Design is great. Let's see. All right, so then having established that, I'm going to try to get through to the last thing, and then I will close it down for the night. So we have that bit about now where he's telling us, hey, you playing this weird monster creature is not all as cracked up to be. You get into the nitty-gritty of the world. No, Soren played a Minotaur. Oh yeah, I think it was great. And I made it work. See, when I ended up having a whole Minotaur society, and I had some cool stuff I thought for them. My player playing a Minotaur, and certainly he had to cope with being a Minotaur in the human world. But then at one point they got to go to sort of Minotaur areas, and he got to take charge. And you got to be kind of the man, or you got to be the Minotaur in Minotaur world. And then when he had to go to the human world, yeah, he might have had to skulk around a little bit, but you can find a balance and you can make it kind of interesting, I think. And there's fun to be had for what do you do? Where do you hide the Minotaur while you're trying to do that? I mean, there's lots of fictional tropes of the sort of having, not like E.T., like you're putting them in the closet, you're hiding a blanket over their head, you're doing, like, there are all kinds of examples where folks have toyed with this idea of you having something really weird that you need to hide or something else. So it's not something that's somehow impossible in the game. I mean, maybe you'd argue it would get old fast, but at some point, if you're in this town and you've been helping them out, after a while, you feel like you could probably come out of show yourself in that town and they would embrace you at some point because you've been helping them, which is also a trope that happens, right? Where the weird, strange creature who's seen as a monster at first, and then they show themselves to be a helpful hand and they save the village. And so then they're embraced and nobody will come mess with them again. So that you got more options, I think, than maybe Gygax is suggesting here. So you are virtually on your own with regards to monsters of player characters. You have advice as to why they are not featured, why no details of monster character classes are given herein. The rest is up to you. For when all is said and done, it is your world and your players must live in it with their characters. You're on your own, pal. I've told you why I'm not doing it. So now if you want to do it, you got to do it all by yourself. It's kind of like the final thing. Like, are you sure you want to do that? Because you're not getting any support from me. Hey, Mark, I'm glad you enjoyed the stream. So I'm going to stop here. So we're at Lycanthropy, which will be another fun thing to read. This will probably, so seeing as how little I got through tonight, though it was all good, but I didn't get through a ton. Even as I'm skipping stuff, the book is just so dense. So look forward to more of these next week. I don't know if they'll all be in the night. It just so happened this week I had 2 occasions to night stream, so I did, but it's not my norm, as folks who follow the channel know. I usually stream during the day. We'll figure out how to make it work. So just check back and see when the next one's scheduled. Tomorrow I will be doing, that is Friday the 10th, as I'm recording this, March 10th, doing our normal sort of game master community chat. It'll probably be during the day sometimes, so check back for that if you're interested. It is another late nighter, Frederick, but I am wrapping up, so you missed it. But you can always go back to front and watch it. If you give a thumbs up on your way out, that would be awesome. If you found yourself in here not subscribed and this stuff seems cool to you, if you want to go ahead and subscribe, that would also be awesome. Otherwise, have a great rest of your night or day or whenever you end up watching or listening to this. Yes, Terrence, this is Hex Press After Dark. Signing off. Game on, everybody. I will talk to you later. Bye now.